You're right,
There's
Larry.
a lot to cover within these debates. She was fired up in that
They're really
debate.
talking about the lockdowns in Michigan because people are accusing Gretchen Whitmer of locking them down too long, our kids out of school too long. In New York, the focus was really on crime. And with Fetterman, because he suffered that stroke about 5 months ago, everyone was tuning in to see if he was going to be able to handle himself properly.
Right, because only one debate. It was last night in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so much is on the line because statistically they are in a dead heat. And the question was, how would Mr. Fetterman do after having had the stroke? And of course, his campaign came out a couple of days ago and said, don't expect him to do really well because this is Dr. Oz's department. Dr. Oz has been on TV for 20 seasons. He's going to be great. Well, as it turns out, we're going to play you some...
He has the experience. He's lieutenant governor.
Well, for a term, that's right. And so the big question is, how recovered was he? And this morning, the headlines are not positive for him. He did not do well. It was hard to watch. The very first words out of his mouth were good evening. Rather, the first thing he said when he came out was, hi, good night, everybody. Rather than good evening, good night. It sounds like the end. Sounded like a mistake.
Let's take a look at that moment
and his
almost right there. And the flip-flopping on fracking.
I've always supported fracking, and I always believe that independence with our energy is critical, and we can't be held, ransom to somebody like Russia.
I must correct the record.
You're saying tonight that you support fracking, that you've always supported fracking, but there is that 2018 interview that you said, quote, I don't support fracking at all. So how do you square the two?
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand and I do support fracking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fetterman.
I'm sorry, Lisa, but there's not just a statement you read. There are multiple. There's pictures of him signing a moratorium.
We have to move on.
But we have to get the fundamentals of the truth out here. John Fetterman over and over again took positions against energy.
So, of course, the moderators had a hard time because it gets to a point where it's just abuse, where there has to be some sort of mercy rule in it because it was just unwatchable. I think it's important before we start talking about the policy position there that was obviously a flip-flop. This all started during the primary when he just went ghost. You didn't know where he was. He wasn't doing campaign stops, and everyone was saying everything is okay. Well, then comes to find out they had to confess that he had indeed had a stroke. And obviously, we're praying for him that he gets a full recovery. But it comes to a point where, does the power mean that much more? I mean, you cannot watch that debate and not come to the conclusion that his health and recovery should be his top priority. And then you get into the policy position, which he clearly could not defend on that stage. It was painful to watch.
They asked about a doctor's report, and he said, I think standing up here is being transparent enough, actually showing up for this debate. His speech and his hearing problems were definitely evident. He was missing words and pausing awkwardly at times. And then he had to rely on the closed captioning so that he could follow the conversation, and he stumbled over words. But when it comes to the issues, to your point, when you're in the fracking industry in that state, which is the majority of their economy in Pennsylvania, and he said in 2016, when he unsuccessfully ran for Senate, that he called for a moratorium on fracking, and then he said it again in 2018, as Dr. Oz was pointing out and the moderators were pointing out. But now he says, I've always supported fracking. It's not true.
Yeah, it is not. But last night he made it very clear in his response, I'm for fracking, even though they called him on it.
But do we believe the Fetterman of this year or the Fetterman of 2016 and
Politicians oftentimes change their position, but it was hard to watch, and you've got to figure on this Wednesday morning, whoever in the campaign thought it was a good idea that he do that debate last night, they're probably saying, what everybody's saying, what were you thinking? Yeah. You wonder whether it is just the auditory.
They thought that they could accomplish it. They didn't want to do any of them.
But how much of it had to do with the stroke, and how much did it have to do with the fact that he had positions that were hard to defend, and in particular, the fracking thing and crime and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, he said taxpayers need to pay for injection sites for drugs. He said no restrictions on abortion in the past. He supports sanctuary cities. And Dr. Oz said Fetterman is far too left, and he did say, I would support President Trump if he decides to run again.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.